The cub tracked her like prey across the mess hall, then pounced into her arms. The siren over Hydro Tier 4 didn't ring, it bit. A high-frequency wail designed by someone who had studied panic responses and decided to optimize for them. It hit Tess Valor in the back teeth before it reached her ears, and her synth-ration fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Around her, the midshift mess scattered. 23 vent riggers who'd been eating in exhausted silence were suddenly a single organism moving toward the blast doors, chairs scraping, trays clattering, someone's cooling mug of black tea spinning off the edge of a table and shattering on the deck grating. Tess did not move. She watched the mug. The handle had broken clean off, sitting 2 feet from the rest of it. That struck her as wrong in a way she couldn't name, not the mug, but the fact that her brain had stopped to notice it when there was a containment siren screaming in her teeth. Then the vapor cleared. Hydro Tier 4 ran warm. Always pipes fat with recycled condensate sweating along the ceiling. The moss vats along the north wall, adding a green biological tang to the recycled air. The vapor drifted in low clouds between the support columns, and things moved through it strangely, their shapes arriving before their sounds did. The thing that stepped out of the vapor was 80 pounds of armored muscle and thermal plating. It moved in a low, deliberate stalk, shoulders dropped, haunches rolling, the articulated scales along its spine catching the amber work lights and throwing them back as scattered color. Its eyes were fixed on Tess. They were the pale gold of a welding spark caught at the exact moment it died. It ignored everyone else. The blast doors, the running riggers, the crash of overturned chairs, none of it registered. It had found what it wanted, and what it wanted was the one person in Hydro Tier 4 who hadn't moved. A creature built to shear through starship hulls was currently stalking a tired vent rigger across a wet industrial floor. The siren kept biting. 3 hours before the containment siren, Tess Valor had been doing what she did every cycle 14 mid-shift, wedged into an access crawl above vent stack 7, running a thermal seal along a conduit joint that had been weeping coolant since the last rotation. She smelled like ozone. She always smelled like ozone. It was the kind of smell that settled into the seams of your clothes and stayed there no matter how many times you ran the suit through the recycler, faintly metallic, faintly charged like the air right before a storm that never quite arrived. The other riggers had stopped commenting on it. New station workers sometimes asked her if she'd been near an electrical fault. She had learned to say yes rather than explain. Hydro Tier 4 was her quadrant. 300 meters of pipe runs, pressure valves, moss vats, and recycling intakes that fed the orbital station's water loop, and her job was to make sure none of it leaked, sparked, or decided to do anything interesting. She had been doing it for 14 months. Before Aegis 9, she'd done atmospheric sealing on a colony world called Breck's Landing, where the draft hounds stood taller than she did at the shoulder, and the younger ones had a habit of treating the riggers as moving obstacles to be assessed and occasionally bowled over. She'd learned a lot about large animals on Breck's Landing. Mostly, she'd learned that they communicated clearly if you were willing to pay attention instead of panic. Her thermos was still sitting on the rim of the vent access hatch when she finally descended at meal break. She'd had 2 sips by the time the tier had filled with the usual mid-shift crowd, riggers, pipe fitters, 2 waste processing techs who always sat at the corner table and never spoke to anyone. Someone had brought packaged synth rations from the upper level and was handing them out without being asked. Tess took one, sat at the nearest bench, and ate without tasting it. She was on the 4th bite when the siren hit. The tier cleared in under 6 seconds. Tess had counted that kind of thing before. She'd been through 3 hull breach drills, a coolant alarm, and 1 genuinely unpleasant electrical event in her 14 months, and 6 seconds was fast. Fear was fast. The people around her moved with the specific economy of a crowd that had practiced this response. Whether they knew it or not, she stayed on the bench, not because she was brave, because her fork was halfway to her mouth, and her brain had snagged on the mug handle lying on the deck grating, and by the time she'd finished noticing it, everyone else was already gone. The vapor shifted. She saw the shoulder drop first. That was the thing that stopped her from standing up. Not courage, familiarity. On Breck's Landing, the draft hounds had a specific posture they took when they were working out whether you were a threat or a toy. Shoulders low and rolling, haunches gathered. Ears, or the equivalent, in species that had them, angled forward rather than flat. It was the posture of something curious. of something that had already decided it wasn't going to hurt you and was now running an experiment to confirm whether you'd figured that out yet. The Goldari kit that stepped out of the vapor wore that posture exactly. Tess set her fork down. The kit was 80 pounds if it was an ounce, and all of that weight was moving with the precise fluid economy of something that had never once in its life needed to hurry, because it had never once in its life failed to catch a thing it was following. The thermal plates along its spine were still flush, not raised, not flared. Its tail moved in a slow, sweeping arc, low to the deck. The pale gold eyes tracked Tess without blinking. She had read the station briefs on Goldari. Everybody had. Mandatory orientation, day 1. Laminated card in your bunk. Apex thermal hunters. Bite force sufficient to shear standard issue conduit. Localized thermal spike capability. Do not make direct eye contact. Do not approach. Do not run. The brief had not covered what to do when one was already approaching you. She pulled off her thermal glove, slowly. The reinforced knuckles and scorch marks along the fingers, 7 months of close work with live heating elements, landed on the bench beside her ration tray. Then she lowered her right hand to knee height, palm open, and waited. The kit stopped. It looked at her hand, then it looked at her face. Its shoulder plates clacked once, a sound like 2 armored surfaces settling against each other, and a handful of iridescent scales shed from the joint, catching the amber light as they drifted to the wet deck grating. Something was off about that sound. Not the clacking, she'd heard that in the orientation footage, but the scales. In the footage, scale shedding during threat display meant stress response, elevated temperature, pre-strike physiological preparation. The kit's plates were cool. She could feel it from 3 feet away, or rather, she couldn't feel anything. No heat bloom, no thermal spike. The scales had shed from a posture that was completely relaxed. Tess looked at the kit. The kit looked at Tess. "All right, hotshot," she said. "Let's see it." The kit launched. 80 pounds of armored muscle crossed the 6 feet between them in less than a second. Tess had just enough time to drop back off the bench and brace. And then the kit hit her sternum with both forepaws and drove her flat onto the deck grating, and her head bounced once on the rubberized floor pad, and the breath left her body in a single comprehensive exhale. She stared at the ceiling. The ceiling stared back, and then the weight on her chest began to vibrate. Built slowly, the way a ship's engines built when they were spooling up from cold. Not a sudden noise, but a gathering of sound from somewhere deep in the kit's chest. Started low, so low she felt it in her ribs before she heard it. A resonance that had no business being as warm as it was, given that it was coming from an armored creature that could shear conduit. The kit, "Rock," said the collar tag she could now see from 3 inches away, engraved in both standard and what she assumed was Goldari script, tucked his broad head under her chin, adjusted his weight so that approximately 70% of it was resting on her ribcage, rolling outward through the thermal plates and into the deck grating and up through Tess's spine and into the back of her skull. It was the single loudest purr she had ever heard in her life, and went still. Tess lay on the wet industrial floor of Hydro Tier 4, arms half-pinned under 80 pounds of apex predator, and stared at the sweating pipes above her. "Right," she said, "to no one in particular. Okay." She tried to shift. Rock's plates tightened, a subtle increase in pressure that communicated its message without ambiguity. She stopped shifting. The purr deepened, a sound she could feel in her molars. The thermal bloom that had been absent before was present now, a steady, even warmth radiating from the plates directly against her chest. Not a spike, not a warning, but the deliberate and extremely heavy equivalent of a heated blanket. She could hear the blast doors at the tier's far end still sealed. The siren had cut out at some point, she wasn't sure when. The tier was silent except for the drip of condensate from the overhead pipes and the seismic purring of the creature currently using her as a mattress. She reached up carefully with her ungloved hand and found the edge of the plates behind Rock's ears, where the armoring gave way to something that felt closer to dense, close-packed fiber. She rubbed experimentally. The purr went up half an octave. "Okay," she said again. She settled her head back on the deck padding and looked at the pipes. One of them had a slow weep at the joint near the number 3 intake. She'd flagged it last rotation and it still hadn't been touched. That was going to need a full reseal before end of cycle 16, or the moss vats were going to get a chloride hit they weren't rated for. She made a note of it in the back of her mind, in the section she kept for things she was going to deal with when she wasn't currently pinned to a floor by an alien predator. Somewhere beyond the sealed blast doors, she heard the heavy magnetic clunk of security override. They were coming in. She estimated, about 30 seconds before this became significantly more complicated. The blast doors opened with the specific sound of authority that had never once in its institutional life considered the possibility that it might be wrong. 3 guards came through first, moving in the practiced wedge formation that the Aegis 9 security manual presumably described as controlled entry. They had pulse rifles at the low ready position, barrels angled at the deck grating. Behind them came Prefect Solon, crisp uniform, rigid posture, the biometric scanner pad in his left hand already lit up with enough red indicators to suggest the software was having a strong opinion about the situation. He stopped when he saw Tess. She watched his face work through several stages of assessment. The first stage was human, alive, unhurt. She could see the brief recalibration as the expected scene, blood, structural damage, a crisis in active progress, failed to materialize. The second stage was Goldari unit in contact with station personnel. That one landed harder, and his grip on the scanner pad tightened. The third stage took longer, because it required him to reconcile the phrase violent bio-breach incident with the actual image in front of him, which was a vent rigger lying flat on the deck, grating with an armored apex predator asleep on her chest. Solon's jaw moved. Valor, he said. His voice had the texture of someone who had prepared a great many words for this situation and was now discovering that none of them fit. Are you injured? No, Tess said. Are you? He stopped. Started again. Is the unit he's asleep? Tess said. Or close to it. Keep your voice down. One of the guards shifted his weight. The pulse rifle barrel tracked slightly upward. Rock's plates didn't move, but the purr changed frequency, a small, subtle drop in pitch that Tess felt in her collarbone more than she heard it. She pressed her palm flat against the thermal plating behind his ears, and the purr climbed back. Prefect, she said, keeping her voice even, I need you to tell your people to lower the barrels. The vibration signature from a charged pulse rifle is not something I want this kit picking up right now. Solon looked at his scanner pad. The scanner pad apparently had a lot to say. You are in contact with a code black biological hazard. I am lying on a floor with a tired juvenile who decided I was warm enough to sleep on. Those are different situations. The designation, Tess said, is wrong. She said it flat, without heat. The way she said things when she was sure of them. On Breck's Landing, one of the older riggers had told her that the most dangerous thing you could do with a large animal was act uncertain. Not because the animal would exploit it, they didn't think that way, but because uncertainty broadcast as aggression, and aggression got you a response you hadn't wanted. The same principle she was finding applied to prefects. Solon looked up from the scanner pad. He looked at Rock, he looked at Tess. Something moved across his face that was not quite anger, and not quite confusion, something in between that hadn't made up its mind yet. Step away from the unit, he said. We will handle containment from here. Rock's eyes opened. They were the pale gold of a welding spark at the moment it died, and they fixed on Solon with an attention that was very different from the drowsy, settled weight of the last several minutes. The purr cut off, not gradually, just gone between one breath and the next. 80 pounds of armored muscle went from dead weight to something coiled and attentive in the span of a single heartbeat. Tess moved her hand, found the plates behind his ears again, pressed, steady, and deliberate. Hey, she said, quietly, hey, I've got you. The gold eyes stayed on Solon, but the coil in Rock's body loosened, not completely, not the way it had been, but enough. The plate settled. The purr didn't come back, but the held breath tension went out of him, and he dropped his chin back against Tess's collarbone. Solon was watching this with the expression of a man whose model of the world was developing an inconvenient crack in it. Prefect, Tess said, what did your scanner just tell you? He looked down at it. He didn't answer immediately, which was, she thought, its own kind of answer. It reads thermal output consistent with, he stopped. Check the pad again. The thermal signature is ambient, Tess said. It's running ambient. No spike, no charge. You're getting the passive warmth from his plating, not a pre-strike escalation. She paused. If he were running a thermal spike, Prefect, we would both know it. I would not currently have hair. The guard on the left shifted his weight again. The guard on the right looked like he was doing math about his career. Solon pulled up something on the pad, scrolled, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Station Protocol Biobreach Code Black requires immediate armed containment of any Goldari unit found in unsupervised contact with. I'm supervising, Tess said. I'm right here. You are pinned to the floor. I'm comfortable. This was not, strictly speaking, entirely true. But Roke's weight was steady and warm. She had a very clear memory from Breck's landing of a half-grown draft hound who had developed an attachment to her and expressed it by lying on her feet every time she sat down to run maintenance logs. And she had learned then what she knew now. You don't move an animal. The deck grating had left a textured impression along her left shoulder blade, and the recycled air chill that lived permanently in Hydro Tier 4 was working its way through her work suit from the uninsulated side. That has chosen you, not if you wanted to trust you again. Valor? Solon's voice had shifted. The confusion had resolved into something harder. This is not a request, I know, she said. Neither is this. Lower the weapons. Give him 10 minutes to decide to move on his own, and nobody has a problem. The code black relay has already been triggered, Solon said. And something in his tone changed when he said it, flattening, almost careful. The way voices got when people were delivering news they'd rather not be responsible for. The automated system logged the incident. Tess went still. Bio-breach code black triggers a distress relay to registered fleet contacts for any Goldari unit flagged as involved in a violent he didn't commit violence. The system, Solon said, not her hands, those kept their steady pressure on Rock's plates. But the rest of her went very quiet. What automated system, she said. Solon looked at his pad. He had the manner of a man reading something for the second time and not finding it more comfortable. Does not make that distinction. There was a pause that lasted approximately the length of time it took Tess to understand the full shape of what she was hearing. The station's automated protocol had gone out to the Goldari fleet. It had flagged Rock by name, by collar tag, by registered unit as involved in a violent incident. That signal was already traveling. It could not be recalled. Somewhere in the traffic lanes beyond Aegis 9's hull, a fleet channel had just received a message that translated, in effect to, "Your kit is in trouble." She looked at Rock. He was watching Solon with those pale gold eyes not moving, the plates along his spine fractionally raised, not flared, not hot, but up, listening. Tess covered his eyes with her palm. The plates came down. "How long?" she said. Solon checked his pad. The nearest registered Goldari contact is a pause, currently docked at checkpoint Alpha. The pipes dripped. The condensate ran along the MOSFET gutters and made its quiet sound. "Already on station?" Tess said. "The hunting party arrived 8 hours ago," Solon said. "Scheduled inspection and resupply. They were due to." He stopped. The scanner pad in his hand had started showing new readings. He stared at them. His face did the thing again, the multi-stage recalibration, each stage slightly worse than the last. "Perfect," Tess said, and there was something almost gentle in it. "What is your scanner telling you now?" "There is a..." He cleared his throat. "There appears to be a Goldari unit at checkpoint Alpha, requesting access to Hydro Tier 4. "Big one?" Tess asked. Solon looked at the biometric readings. His posture had changed. The rigid professional certainty had developed. Somewhere in the last 4 minutes, a significant structural problem. He looked like a man whose entire career had prepared him for a situation that had then declined to be that situation. "Large," he confirmed. "Yes, I would say large." Rock made a sound. Not the purr, something shorter, percussive, a single click from the back of his throat. And then, with the unhurried dignity of something that had never once been in a hurry, he lifted his broad head off Tess's collarbone, turned it toward the sealed blast doors at the tier's far end, and made the sound again. An answer came from beyond the doors. It was not loud. That was the thing about it. It wasn't loud, and it didn't need to be. It moved through the hole in the deck plating and the recycled air with the authority of something that had simply never needed volume to make itself understood. It was low and resonant, and it carried in it a question that Tess didn't need to speak Goldari to translate. "Is my kit safe?" Rock looked at Tess. Tess looked at the blast doors. She reached up and found the plates behind his ears one more time. "Yeah," she said. "Go tell her." The blast doors opened before Solon could decide whether to let them. That was the first thing Tess registered, not the sound of them, which was the same heavy magnetic clunk she'd heard from the other side, but the fact that they moved on their own. The override panel on the wall had lit up green, which meant someone with higher station clearance than a Hydro-tier prefect had keyed the release from the outside. Morva walked through. She was not what the orientation brief had prepared Tess for. The brief had shown footage of Goldari adults in the context of threat assessment, posture displays, thermal flares, the kind of documentation gathered by people filming from a safe distance with the specific intention of communicating danger. She stood close to 2.5 meters, the thermal plates along her shoulders and upper arms carrying a faint, deep amber glow, not a spike, not a threat display. It had prepared Tess for something alarming. Morva was alarming, but not in the way the brief had meant, but the color of something that had been running very hot very recently and was in the process of controlling that. Her eyes moved across the tier in one sweep. Guards. Scanner pad. Solon. The weapons. Then they found Rock. He was still beside Tess, his broad head turned toward the door, plates settled, tail making that slow arc across the deck grating. When he saw Morva, the arc stopped. He made the click again, the short percussive one from the back of his throat. Morva's amber glow dropped by half. It was not a small thing to watch. Tess had not understood, until that moment, how much of Morva's arrival had been controlled fear, not aggression, fear. The change moved through her plating from the shoulders down, the color draining out of it like heat, leaving a metal surface set on a cold bench. The specific and ancient terror of a parent who has been told their child is in danger and has been running toward that information for however long it had taken to get clearance, and cross a docking corridor and override a blast door. The amber dropped. The plates settled. The eyes stayed on Rock for a long moment. Then they moved to Tess. "You are the one who did not run," Morva said. Her standard was precise and measured, each word placed with the care of someone who had learned the language as a tool, rather than grown up inside it. The voice itself was low, not threatening, but structural, the kind of voice that belonged to something that had never needed to shout. "I didn't see a reason to," Tess said. She was still on the deck. She hadn't tried to stand. Rock was leaning against her left side now. His weight settled against her ribs, and she had learned in the last 20 minutes that his idea of personal space was a concept he found largely theoretical. Morva looked at the position of the kit against the rigger, at the hand resting, unhurried, against the plates behind his ears, at the way Rock had angled his body between Tess and the 3 guards with the pulse rifles, not as a display, but as something automatic, the way you shifted to put yourself between a cold draft and something you didn't want to see get cold. "Perfect," Morva said, without looking at Solon, Hunt Matron. Solon's voice had recovered some of its professional register, but it was doing a lot of work to stay there. "I need to advise you that the code black relay has been." "I received it," Morva said. "I am here because I received it." She paused. "I was told my kit had committed a violent act on a station worker. The protocol defines contact as, I can see the contact." She was still looking at Tess. "I am asking you what violence occurred." Solon opened his mouth. Tess spoke first. "He knocked me down and sat on me," she said. "He hasn't moved since. I've got a pattern on my shoulder blade from the deck grating. That's the extent of it." Morva's gaze dropped to the deck grating, then back to Tess. The honest answer was long and involved draft hounds and a colony world and 14 months of reading equipment, the way other people read faces. "You are not afraid." No. Why Tess thought about how to answer that. She was aware that none of that was the kind of answer you gave to a 2.5-meter armored apex predator who had just walked through a blast door to collect her child and found the child asleep on a stranger. "His shoulder plates were down," she said. "His tail was moving. He shed scales before he charged, and his thermal was ambient." She paused. "On Breck's Landing, where I grew up, draft hounds do something similar when they're deciding whether you're safe. The physical language is different, but the logic is the same. He wasn't hunting me. He was asking me something." Morva was quiet for a moment. "What was he asking?" she said. "Whether I'd stay still?" Tess said. "Whether I'd hold?" Another pause. Longer this time. Morva looked at Rock. He had not moved from Tess's side. His plates were flush, his tail making that slow arc, his eyes half closed with the particular contentment of something that had gotten exactly what it went looking for and was in no hurry to give it up. He has not made hearth choice before, Morva said. Her voice had changed slightly, something careful in it, still precise, but with a quality Tess didn't have a name for yet, not with any member of the station, not with any non-Goldari. I didn't know it had a name, Tess said. There are things that do not need names to be true. Morva's eyes came back to her, but they have names. Solon cleared his throat. He had the energy of a man who had been standing in a corner of a conversation that kept rearranging itself around him, and who was now making a considered decision to assert the existence of the corner. I will need your relay, Morva said. Told me my kit had committed violence. The protocol, your protocol, Morva said. Called the wrong thing by the wrong name and sent a signal to my fleet that caused 3 matrons and a scout wing to alter their approach vectors. She looked at him for the first time, fully. I am required to note, he said, that regardless of the cultural context, the station mandate on unsanctioned contact between station personnel and Goldari units remains in effect. The code black was a lawful trigger. The relay has been lost. Solon went quiet in the specific way that people went quiet when something much larger than them had decided to pay attention to them. Your protocol will need to be corrected. Solon's scanner pad beeped. He looked at it. The color left his face in a movement that was almost as fast as the amber leaving Morva's plates had been, but significantly less controlled. Hunt Matron, he said. I'm reading 3 additional Goldari signatures approaching checkpoint Alpha. Yes, Morva said. I told them to wait outside. You told he stopped. You have authority over. They are my matrons, she said simply. They go where I go. They stopped because I asked them to, so that your guards would not have more to point weapons at than they could manage. She looked at the 3 guards with pulse rifles. You may lower those now. If you had not, we would already know. The guards looked at the scanner pad was reading 4 Goldari signatures, 3 of which were outside a checkpoint wall, and 1 of which was currently pressed against a vent rigger on the tier floor. Solon looked at his scanner pad, emitting what any competent thermal reader would identify as a completely relaxed ambient signature. Lower arms, Solon said. He said it the way people said things when they had decided that not saying it was the worse option. Tess let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Rock pressed closer against her ribs. She looked down at him. He had turned his head to watch Morva, but the lean toward Tess hadn't changed. If anything, it had deepened, his weight settling further into her side, the way a thing settles when it has made a decision and finished making it. She could feel the steady, even warmth of his plating through her worksuit. Not a spike, not a warning, just warmth, the way a hearthstone was warm, the kind that had been absorbing heat for a long time and was giving it back slowly. Hey, she said quietly. She's here. You can go. Rock looked at her. The pale gold eyes moved from her face to Morva and back. He made the click sound. He didn't move. Tess looked at Morva. He's not going. Morva made a sound that was not quite a word, something from the back of her throat, short and layered, that Rock responded to by turning his head fully toward her and making the click again, faster this time, twice. A clear back and forth, a conversation. It went on for a moment, then Morva was quiet. He says, she said, and there was something in her voice that Tess still didn't have a name for, that you are warm enough. Tess looked at the pipes. The slow weep at the number 3 intake was still there. She had not fixed it. She had been lying on a floor for the better part of half an hour, and she was going to need to log a reason for the interrupted maintenance cycle, and she was going to be sore along her left shoulder blade for at least 3 days. She started this. The Hunt Matron was watching her with an expression that Tess had no prior reference for, not in her 14 months on Aegis 9, not in her years on Breck's Landing. It is not a small thing, Morva said. What he has said. Tess looked at her. Not in any of the orientation footage or the laminated cards in the bunk or the mandatory briefings about Goldari being apex hunters and biological hazards and things you did not approach. It was an expression that she had seen on exactly one kind of face before. The face of someone who has just watched a thing they were not sure was possible turn out to be possible, and who has not yet decided what to do with that. Then Morva said, Prefect, Hunt Matron, the worker on your floor, she said. What is her standing on this station? Solon blinked. She is atmospheric vent rigger, grade 3. Standard contract, nothing. He checked his pad, reflexively. Nothing flagged. Clean record. She is not ranked, Morva said. She is not, no. She's a rigger, maintenance tier. Morva nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. That is interesting, she said. My kit has made hearth-coist twice in his life. Once was to a Hunt Matron's daughter. The other, she looked at Tess, appears to be now. Solon's pad beeped again. He looked at it with the expression of a man who had reached the point where he was no longer entirely sure the scanner pad was his ally. The 3 additional Goldari units are requesting to enter Hydro Tier 4. Tell them, Morva said. Chakshput Alpha is reporting. He stopped. Read again that the Wormkin verification takes precedence over checkpoint protocol. The silence that followed was the kind that happened when a sentence landed, and nobody in the room was entirely sure of the weight of it yet. What verification? Solon said. Morva looked at Tess. Tess looked at Solon. I genuinely don't know either, she said. Solon looked at his pad. He looked at Morva. He looked at the 3 Metrons visible through the blast door viewport, standing in the corridor with the patient, unbothered stillness of things that had decided to wait and were in no hurry about it. He looked at Tess. She shrugged. Don't look at me. I've been on the floor this whole time. It was the wrong thing to say or the right thing, depending on what you were measuring. The guard on the left made a sound that was almost a laugh and then converted it into a cough with the specific professionalism of someone who had decided their career was still worth protecting. Rock's tail swept a slow arc across the deck, grating, the pipes dripped. Then he looked at Morva and said, with the caution of a man reading from a document he hadn't written, "What does Wormkin verification require?" It requires, Morva said, that I confirm the choice was made freely, that the one chosen understood the contact. Solon straightened his uniform. It was a small gesture, adjusting the collar, smoothing a crease that wasn't there. He did it the way people did things when they needed their hands to be busy while their brain worked something out. And that the kit's behavior was not a threat. She paused. I have seen all 3. And then it is done. Solon's pad beeped. He looked at it. He pressed something. He looked at it again. The code black requires there is a mandatory incident report, filed with Aegis 9 Security Command. I cannot simply file it, Morva said. He blinked. File your report, she said. Write what happened. A Goldari kit made hearth choice with a station worker. The worker accepted. No violence occurred. No injuries. No property damage. She looked at the overturned tray someone had knocked off the table in the initial scatter. The synth ration cooling on the deck grating beside Tess's fork. Minimal property involvement. Tess looked at her abandoned lunch. She had a feeling she was not going to finish it. If I file that, Solon said slowly, the incident classification will require. The system will flag. He stopped. The scanner pad was doing something. He watched it happen. His face went through a version of the multi-stage recalibration she'd seen earlier, but quieter this time, more internal. The face of a man not discovering something new but arriving, reluctantly at something he had been avoiding. The pad showed Rock's thermal signature. The readout had a classification field, and the classification field said threat level, undetermined, because the system had been built for situations where a Goldari in contact with a human meant one thing, ambient, steady, and the situation in front of it meant something the field had no box for. Undetermined, Solon said. Not to anyone, just the word spoken at the pad. Yes, Morva said. The system will need a new box, she said. Then he looked at Tess, and this time the look had something different in it. Not the professional assessment of a prefect managing a code black, but something more human and more tired. That is not today's problem. Solon looked at the pad for a long moment, the look of a man who had spent a significant portion of his career very certain about something and was now standing in a room that had decided to stop cooperating with that certainty. He put the scanner pad under his arm. I will file the report, he said. With the correct classification, he did not specify what the correct classification was. Tess suspected that was because he hadn't decided yet. Guards, he said, stand down. He turned and walked to the blast door, and the 3 guards followed him, and the door opened to the corridor. She suspected he was going to be thinking about it for a while, and the 3 waiting matrons parted to let them through with the unhurried courtesy of things that had never doubted for a moment that they would. The blast door closed. The tier was quiet. Tess looked at Morva. Morva looked at Tess. Rock looked at both of them with the serene attentiveness of someone who had caused a very significant amount of disruption and felt fine about it. "Right," Tess said. So she tried to get up. Her left shoulder blade informed her of the decision the deck grating had made about it during the last half hour, and she reconsidered her approach, rolling to one side first and getting a knee under her. She was standing in the middle of Hydro Tier 4, slightly stiff, smelling of ozone and recycled air. Rock stood when she stood, adjusting his weight with the fluid ease of something that simply did not experience awkward transitions, and then pressed back against her left leg and stayed there. With 80 pounds of armored apex predator leaning against her left knee, and the Hunt Matron of what was apparently a 3-matron plus scout wing hunting party, looking at her from 6 feet away, she picked up her thermal glove from the bench. The scorch marks on the knuckles caught the amber work lights. She turned it over once, the way her hands did things when she needed a moment. "Warmkin," she said. "What does that mean exactly?" Morva considered the question. "It means," she said, that you are under the protection of this kit's line and of mine, that in any Goldari port, any hunting territory, any station where we have standing, you have standing also." Tess looked at the thermal glove. "I'm a vent rigger," she said. "Yes," Morva said. "I fix pipes." "Yes, I wasn't. I didn't do anything. I just didn't run." Morva's plates had settled fully now, all the amber gone, the deep iridescent gray of her resting state catching the tear's light and breaking it into faint color along the edges. She looked at Tess the way she had looked at her since she'd walked through the blast door, with that expression Tess still didn't have a precise name for, though she was getting closer. "In the years I have brought Rock to stations," Morva said, "and there have been many, on many routes he has been contained, separated, spoken about as a hazard, held at checkpoints while his readings were taken, watched," she paused. "He has never been held. Not until today." Tess looked at Roke. He was watching her with those pale gold eyes, his weight steady against her knee, his tail making the slow arc. She thought about what it would be like to grow up being the thing in the room that everyone was afraid of, and never once having someone just stay still. Drop to one knee. "Say, all right, hotshot, let's see it." She cleared her throat. "He knocked me flat," she said. "I want that on record." "He did," Morva agreed. The expression shifted, and Tess finally identified it. It was the Goldari equivalent of amusement, and it lived in the plates around the eyes, a subtle loosening. "He is not gentle. He's 70% ribcage bruise, 80, Morva said, with what was definitely amusement now. "He gets it from his father." Tess looked at the pipes. The weep at the number 3 intake was still there, still her problem. The maintenance log was going to require a note that reads something like "delayed due to alien bonding event," and she was going to have to figure out how to file that in a way that didn't get flagged by the same system that had just filed a code black on a kit taking a nap. "I should," she started. "Yes," Morva said. She reached into the fold of plating at her left shoulder, a place Tess hadn't noticed before, a flat carry space between 2 of the larger thermal plates, and withdrew something. She held it out. It sat in her palm and caught the light the way the shed scales had caught it on the deck grating, but larger, heavier, the colors more present, deep iridescent gray with threads of amber and green running through it in patterns that moved when the angle changed. It was a shedding scale, but not a shed one, a kept one. The edges were polished smooth, worn down in a way that suggested handling, that someone had carried this and turned it over, the way Tess turned her thermal glove over in the moments when hands needed to be busy. "This was Rock's," Morva said. "From his first thermal shedding, I have carried it since." She set it in Tess's open palm. "Now you carry it." Tess looked at the scale. It was warm. Not from the ambient heat of Morva's plating, or not only, it had the warmth of something held for a long time, the deep settled heat of a thing that had been someone's to carry and was now being given. No warning, no ceremony, no declaration. Just a weight placed in an open hand. Roke pressed his head against her left hip and made the click. Once deliberate. Tess closed her fingers around the scale. "Warmkin," Morva said quietly. "It is not a title, it is a door." She looked at the blast door where Solon and the guards had gone, and then back at Tess. "What comes through it is up to you." Tess thought about that. She thought about the laminated card in her bunk that said, "Do not make direct eye contact and do not approach," and had a diagram of a Goldarian threat displayed that looked nothing whatsoever like Rock currently looked. She thought about the maintenance log she had to file, and the pipe joint she had to reseal, and the 3 hours before her next shift that she had been planning to spend horizontal in her bunk. She thought about the draft hounds on Breck's Landing, and the old rigger who had told her that the most dangerous thing with a large animal was acting uncertain, and the thing he had not said, which was the other side of it, which was that when you stayed still, which was like something between a very large armored cat and a heated mattress with opinions. Sometimes the large animal came to you, and that changed things. She looked at Rock. He looked back. The pale gold of a welding spark, patient and warm. "Don't wake him up when he's sleeping," she said. "That's my only condition." Morva's plates shifted. The expression around her eyes came back. Deeper this time. "Noted," she said. "Wormkin." The tier was quiet. Condensate dripped from the overhead pipes. The moss vats along the north wall made their low biological sound. Somewhere in the system beyond the blast door, Prefect Solon was filing a report that did not have a box for what had happened, and 3 matrons were waiting in a corridor with the patient, unbothered stillness of things that knew the outcome was already settled. Tess looked at the number 3 intake joint and its slow, faithful weep. She was going to need to seal that before cycle 16. She had tools in the access crawl above vent stack 7, and a thermos that was long cold by now, and a maintenance log that was going to be interesting reading for whoever reviewed it. She pulled her thermal glove back on. Later, when the shift supervisor came to log the mess hall incident and get Tess's statement, he would find her back up in the access crawl above vent stack 7, running thermal seal along the number 3 conduit joint. He would also find, sitting on the deck grating below the access hatch, an 80-pound armored Goldari kit in a neat compact curl, his thermal plates at ambient, his eyes half closed. The scorch marks on the knuckles settled into place, familiar as a name, the sound of her work steady and unhurried above the hiss of the pipes, waiting with the patience of something that had chosen its person and was not in any hurry about the rest of it. The supervisor looked at the kit. He looked up at the hatch. He opened his log to write something and then closed it again. When the vent rigger finally came down from the crawl, Rock pressed against her left knee without opening his eyes, and she reached down once and found the plates behind his ears, and the purr that started was deep enough to feel in the deck grating. She had a 3-hour window before the next shift. She used most of it in her bunk, flat on her back, staring at the ceiling. Rock took up 2/3 of the available surface area, radiating warmth through her work suit at a temperature that was precisely correct. The shedding scale sat on the shelf above her bunk, turned so the iridescent face caught the bunk light and threw it back in slow color. Not a hazard warning, a key. She left the laminated card where it was.